Welcome to another episode of Montgomery County Republican Club's Direct Line Live, and your hosts tonight, Mark Unkefer and Jackie Saxteen.
We really should get a band or something like that, like a little musical fanfare to
Royalty
lead.
free music.
Yeah, lead this off. I don't know that Dwight's the right intro, but hi, I'm Mark Unkefer, and I'm president of the Montgomery County Republican Club, and I'm joined here with our executive director, Jackie Saxteen. Jackie?
Hi, everybody. So,
Jack, go ahead.
well, I would say we're so excited to be joined by our special guest tonight. But Mark, I think you're better off doing the bio than I am because I think Chris and I met about 30 seconds ago. So.
Well, yeah, Chris is a transplant from New Jersey who is down in the great state of North Carolina, which we wanted to hear a lot about from because there, in a lot of eyes, it's really ground zero for a lot of the races that are going on this year. It's a very competitive state. It's trended towards the Republican, although it currently has a Democratic governor, and it has been very, very competitive. So we want to hear a little bit about. We also want to give you a little bit of a hard time, although actually, just full disclosure, Jackie and I are transplants in Maryland, so we can't talk too much trash about Yankees coming from up north, moving down to well, we're a border state, you're a southern state.
I was like, yeah. Be able to relate. Most people most times I tell people I'm from New Jersey, they apologize.
Hey, I mean, I'm always the one that's got to come up with something positive to say about Jersey too. So, it is what it is at this point.
Perfectly suburban.
There you go. That works. Any adjective will do at that point.
So I guess the number one question on at least people around the country's mind, at least the political question, is how are things looking in North Carolina for the presidential election?
I apologize.
Well, I'll give my best opinion. I mean, I'm always the one that's got to come up with something positive to say about Jersey too. But as we know, back in the last cycle here, it was obviously a very competitive state and extremely important here as we, tally up the totals and we look state by state here to presidential election. In my opinion right now, I mean, it looks from most of the numbers that I've seen in the conversations that I've had, it looks very even. And it's, it all kind of depends on a lot of turnout and how we look at everything with COVID going on right now and how we can kind of account maybe for, how excited folks will be to kind of get out to the polls in any way, shape, or form at this point. How I look at North Carolina, at least a little differently than some other states, and I can at least attest to it because I'm here, is that there is a big divide on whether it's ideological or whether it's just the makeup of the entire state itself between some of the major cities like Raleigh that I'm in currently right now and Charlotte, the Winston-Salem and Wilmingtons of the world. And then there's a lot of really forgotten parts of North Carolina that I don't think a lot of people think about when it comes down to totals and the partisan makeup of our state. I mean, our eastern part of the state is extremely important. And I think when you look at it from a Republican's perspective is that, the census indication that we've gotten is not extremely great in terms of trying to make sure that we get everybody on board there. And we need to make sure that we get our outreach going to our eastern part and our western parts of our state as we go in either direction there, because that's a lot of the Republican stronghold. I mean, that's most of our folks here that oftentimes are the ones that have the most to say and then are often the most quick to be forgotten about in terms of whether it's presidential politics, local politics, whatever the case is. It's extremely important. And I think that's where you kind of make up for a lot of what we see right now is even in terms of the two candidates is that, we need those folks to get out there. We need to make sure that, we have their vote here as Republicans is because they're extremely important. And a lot of times when we talk about transplants, even like myself, regardless of how long I've been here and when I decided to come down here, we have a lot of out-of-state people coming to North Carolina and we're a growing state. We've got growing cities. Thankfully, I think a lot of what our state government has done here has been great in terms of economic ways of looking at things. And it's drawn a lot of people to our state. We've drawn a lot of businesses and job creation has been really at an all-time high here. And so we're getting a lot of folks that are coming in here and just like all over the state, whether you look at it from, Texas to California, whatever the case is that when those folks are leaving those places, sometimes their politics are coming with them. And unfortunately, a lot of what our native folks here obviously can be a little bit frustrated as you see kind of the changing of colors here of districts and the way that different precincts and stuff like that look like they're ever changing from cycle to cycle here.
So what's been North Carolina's plan in regards to in-person voting? And, I know in Maryland, drastically reducing the number of places where people can go to vote and trying to really push the mail-in voting, which obviously for a lot of reasons can be very concerning. Do you know what North Carolina's plan is or what they're going to be doing?
So I'm not sure of an exact plan at this point. I know that was very early on with everything with COVID, as we've seen this as an ever-changing situation of, how we're going to react and how things are going to be done moving forward. And obviously months ago, we were looking to pretty much now and even closer, in a month or so from now of what things were going to look like. There was a little bit of a push that I saw, at least in my opinion, from trying to do a little bit of more mail-in voting. I would say in terms of the conversations that we, people here have had and that, everyone else has been trying to push for is, your standard traditional go to the polls and vote. I mean, personally speaking here, I don't see very much of a reason here as we've gotten so far into this situation and we've come to understand more and learn more of how this, disease works, but also of how it affects our everyday routine. And I personally, I don't think there's any reason for us to have any sort of hesitation to get to the polls. And I think a lot of what we're trying to, the responses we're getting from the State Board of Election and folks and officials here are trying to emphasize the fact that, we can still make this happen just like ever before. I mean, whether it's if you have to space folks out, you got to space folks out. If you have to put a mask on, all these are reasonable things if that makes people feel safer. But at the end of the day here is that, we all have our constitutional duty and our moral duty to get to the polls and vote. And we don't think there should be any hindrance right now in our ability to do that. In North Carolina alone, last cycle, we had, 2.5 weeks of early voting here. And that's that's a lot. That's a long time to get there. And, that excuse to not to vote is hard to kind of push on folks at this point if you've got 2.5 weeks to get there. Right now, with everything as it moves forward, personally, I think that we can make it happen here and we can make sure that people get in and vote and not have to go through some of these, obvious, there's a lot of red flags that go on with stuff like that when it comes to mail-in voting. And it's not necessarily a smooth process. And I think right now is what we need is efficiency and effectiveness when it comes to making sure that, in a crisis like this, a public health crisis, we're able to do what we need to do and exist as we are right now. And, we can't come up with different ways to, not make something like that happen. And I think, everybody here is really pushing to make sure that we keep everything, traditionally as we can in terms of voting and make sure that we get folks out there regardless of anything else going on.
Absolutely. Yeah. My personal take on it is like, if you're totally comfortable standing in line, going to the grocery store, and at least in New Jersey, going to the casino and hitting the slot machine, you can stand in line and vote in person. Yeah,
no, I agree. I couldn't agree more. There's a lot of things and how we've looked at this whole crisis, at least personally, even for me, is like, early on, it's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot that we don't know. There's a lot of, rightful way of deferring things to officials and public health officials to figure out what we can and can't do. And even early on, most of those folks were kind of unprecedented and uncharted waters with things. And we've kind of come to the understanding now that, there might be some slight differences in how we do things normally, but that we are able to do things. And, there's really no excuse right now for, and then that's going to go into a completely separate conversation of what I think about our reopening plan when it comes by state basis. But at the end of the day, when it comes to voting, there should be no reason. And I think that's a perfectly good point. You're able to go to the grocery store. You're able to go about life normally right now, and we've all had time to adapt. And I think we can figure out a way to get this done.
Christopher, obviously, when we look at polls, always the sort of imponderable is to figure out what's the actual makeup going to be of the electorate. So we had a different electorate in 2016 than we had in 2018, where folks were really energized in the anti-Trump vote. So now we have a whole other dynamic, obviously, with COVID, and how COVID affects turnout. What's your thinking about that?
It's a good question. I guess we won't know until we know, really, when it comes to a question like that with turnout. I'd like to think with everything going on in the world politically right now, and if we wanted to say last cycle, people were more than anxious and excited to get out, whether it's anti-Trump, pro-Trump, whatever the case is. I would think right now, if you even look past COVID, that people would probably be, with everything going on, whether it's social issues or political issues that we've seen from DC, that folks are probably going to be wanting to go out more now than ever before. And I would think that, there might be a little bit of an issue or in terms of hesitation. But I think everything is so strongly political and partisan right now that speaking for me personally, I know I wouldn't allow something like COVID to kind of get in the way of me voting. Sure. And I think most people probably feel the same, whether it's, in favor of, conservative or Republican politics or politics as a whole right now. I would think if you want your voice heard and you want everything, to go a certain way, if you agree or disagree with how things are going, that if you have to, get there at a different time when less people are there, if you have to wear a mask, like I was saying before, distance yourself from folks in front or behind you, I mean, whatever makes you feel comfortable, I feel like right now most people are willing to accommodate that, and there really should be a pretty excited feeling for everybody to make sure that they get out there and have their voice heard.
Tell us about your governor's race down there. You've got an incumbent Democratic governor who seemed to be in a little bit more trouble, but seems to have been helped by COVID. Is that a fair? Would you have rather have had the election a year ago?
I don't know if I'd rather have had it a year ago. I think it is, and it's a really kind of interesting makeup right now when you look at our state government as a whole, and starting with the governor and even going downward, even into local politics, is that there's still a Republican majority in both the House and the Senate here, and that we have a Democratic governor who won a very close race against former Governor McCrory, and I believe Dwight said you all had him on this before, and that was a lot of that the results of that hindered a lot on HB2 and a lot of what was going on back then with that bill. And now when we look at it here, I mean, unfortunately, like I had mentioned before, we had kind of had personally, and some other folks that I had spoken with had kind of deferred and understood exactly what the governor was trying to do early on here when it came to the reopening of our state and closings and things like that. And it was a lot of unknown, like I had said before. So you were willing to kind of take a step back and precaution. And if we had quarantine or whatever the case was, I think there was a lot of people that were willing at that time to make that accommodation for the public good and for the health of everybody else. And, just kind of to take a step back and understand what was going on. Now we're in the place that I feel like with the governor's race specifically is that things have kind of hindered a lot more on partisan politics than they had any more than anything to do with science or anything more about this right now. And it's been a pretty emotionally vested kind of race that I have seen so far, and that a lot of people feel very strongly one way or the other. And the governor's race, I mean, Lieutenant Governor Dan Forest, I don't know if a lot of folks know this, but the last election cycle had received the most votes out of any political candidate on the ballot here in North Carolina. And it was extremely popular, statewide at that point. And I still believe he has a really good shot here. And I think he's done a lot of really good things in terms of what he said publicly and his kind of counter arguments to a lot of what we've seen kind of coming from the governor's office here is that I think the most frustrating thing for folks like myself and others is kind of the inability right now to have any say into what's going on. A lot of times, a lot of our state's reopening plan and all of the stuff that's in there right now for prohibitions on different aspects of the economy and our everyday life is that, we're not really seeing any consistency, in my opinion. It's really kind of all over the place. We see all the time coming from news outlets around here about, COVID cases and the amount of deaths that are being reported and the positive testings that are going on sites all across our state. And then at the same time, we're seeing, a decrease in numbers, and then there'll be, a press conference saying, well, we're at a good spot, but we're not at a good enough spot in order to get into these different phases that have kind of been implemented incrementally over time here since March. As that we went from phase 1 to phase 2 to back to phase 2.5. And then, next thing you're seeing numbers, as early as a couple weeks ago of our lowest count per day and then our highest count per day. And then all of a sudden, there's a statement coming out from Lifetime Fitness and Crunch Fitness of, a lot of their chains saying, there's no reason for our gyms to be closed this long as they're open in other states. And then all of a sudden gyms are allowed to be open 24 hours before they announce that they're going to open themselves and go against the executive order. So it's been a lot of ups and downs. And I think a lot of folks have kind of looked at it as saying, in major urban areas here in our state, if you want to close certain things, it's understandable based on the population density and the close proximity of people here. It makes sense. And there are precautions that I think some folks maybe even need to take, throughout this timeline. And the governor's attitude has been more of a universal approach in terms of closings and openings, and not really kind of having this, rationale to take a step back and understand maybe where, other folks in the state that don't live in as urban or, in our more rural areas are having, a local restaurant closed since March that has maybe, only a couple hundred people in its close proximity that's family owned at this point. And they're saying, how does that apply to us? Why are we being punished? Why can't we open with a limited capacity? And even then, you're not making up for the economical, deficits at that point when it comes to a business way of looking at it. So there's a lot of frustration in the governor's race right now in terms of folks here. And in terms of polling, like I said, it's kind of up and down. We've seen, with different things being closed and allowing others to be open throughout the timeline, like I mentioned before, is that you'll see the polling numbers fluctuate with that. And then oftentimes, the ultimate decision kind of looks to reflect some of these recent trends in polling numbers in terms of the decisions that are being made here at the top of the chain. But
so what is the status of your public schools?
So right now, public schools, for the most part, are kind of going by district basis when it comes to it. And there are a good amount right now that are mostly, or if not all, virtual. So I go to Campbell Law School, which is it's private law school here in Raleigh. But they have decided to do a kind of a hybrid approach and do a block schedule to kind of minimize people going in and out of the building and have spaced it out. But public schools are a little bit different. Most right now are virtual. And as of today, there was kind of Lieutenant Governor Forrest and some other folks here in the state legislature had kind of had a press conference to kind of push for more in-person attendance for schools, and had a lot of personal testimonials of health officials and parents that are obviously frustrated from this point forward, from last school year into the beginning of this school year now, where their child aren't getting the same education as they had gotten in months past. And I feel like obviously that's more broad than North Carolina, and I think a lot of different states are looking at it maybe in a different way, but it's for the most part all virtual right now, and it's been a little bit different, and I'm sure frustrating for most parents. I mean, I think it's kind of interesting when you look at me in a graduate school, and I have the decision to go hybrid, whether I choose to go in person in some sort of limited capacity with obviously safety procedures in place implemented by the school, and then at the same time, if I have a cousin, for instance, that's in third grade, their parents don't get to choose. I mean, they have to have virtual learning. And it's, today's push, from what I heard and what I had kind of seen going through the news outlets here, is that they're really making a push here as Republicans to try to give people the choice. I mean, school choice is obviously big in terms of their platform as a whole here, but even choice in terms of how they want to continue with their education in the midst of everything going on. So obviously frustrating for them as well.
And I think people also, it's like they're seeing it as so kind of one-dimensional as sending their kid back to school because they think it's better for their learning, or keeping them home because they're worried about their health and safety. But then like the way that expands out is because a lot of these parents rely on their children being in school for 8 hours a day so that they can go to work. And it really does expand so far outside of that bubble of just whether or not your kid attends school in person.
Yeah, and I think what most people are kind of overlooking when it comes to the long time span that kids, whether it's elementary, middle, or even high school, are not able to be in the classroom, are these psychological and social negative consequences that go in with that. Is that we can all remember our times in high school and middle school and how important that social interaction and being able to be with your friends and build on things, but it makes a more conducive educational climate and an atmosphere as a whole. And I would say the same thing even from where I'm at right now, as I did a all virtual class this summer for one of my courses. And it was difficult. I mean, and obviously everyone's in the spot, whether it's the professor or the teacher, and it's understandable frustration as a whole. But, when you're just kind of sitting in your living room and on a computer screen trying to learn everything that you would in person, I mean, it's different. And for parents, I mean, I can only imagine if, for instance, I have two siblings, and if all three of us were, in public schools right now, I wouldn't know how any of us, especially at a young age, would be able to focus, learn, and not have any sort of negative consequences that go on with sitting in the house all day. And then, also have parents that are expected to, in the midst of this crisis, to try to make ends meet, make these mortgage payments, go to work, collect a paycheck, and then also have to be there to monitor and be with their kids 24/7. I mean, it's a really, really steep, kind of thing to expect out of people right now. And it's hard to kind of continue that rationale that I think personally moving forward is, there's got to be a little bit of a change. And when everything related to COVID right now with education as a whole, I mean, again, I'm all in favor of taking these early precautions to understand what's going on. But the only frustration that I see personally is the lack of adaptation that we've had kind of moving forward, is that, if you want to finish the school year virtual, I get it. But I think we've had a lot of time and a lot of resources and a lot of people in the midst of things to try to make it work here moving forward. And there seems to be a lot of hesitation to try to put the students, I think, first here and the parents first here to understand what's going on. And it's unfortunately in the state that I think it's in right now.
Let me shift gears yet and ask a question for Jackie's benefit. So what was the biggest adjustment, the biggest surprise that you faced from moving from New Jersey down to North Carolina?
Oh, well, Mark, I when I moved from Jersey, I was young. So you got to keep that in mind. So I think I was younger when I moved here. I mean, personally, when I moved here, I was like, wow, there's so many like woods and trees here. I was like, this is unbelievable. I'm coming from urban Jersey. I was, right near the border of New York. I mean, it was like, I was North Jersey. I was Bergen County. So I was up there. But I would say, I mean, there's a lot. I mean, I've been up and down here throughout the years to kind of see the difference. It's a lot different here. I mean, I think here there's people from kind of all over. I feel like most people are leaving Jersey. When you come to North Carolina, you'd be surprised how many people I meet on an everyday basis that are like, I'm from New York, I'm from Jersey. Do you know so-and-so? Have you ever been this place? It's like, oh, wow, there are people here from all over the country, where I think is Jersey, you have your New York and New Jersey residents for the most part. And then there's not many other people that are coming from the Midwest or coming.
You grew up here and you stayed here. That's what it is.
Yeah. Most people are leaving, and that's not a knock on them. I mean, obviously,
people are getting sick of my parents. I'm in our beach house right now because they sold our regular house and said, my dad says he refuses to die a resident of the state of New Jersey. The taxes are ridiculous.
Listen, I love Jersey like anybody else. I do. I've got love for it. I promise I do. I mean, my aunt's got a house at the shore that I go up to and I go see her, once a year or so, whatever the case is. And, I've got love for Jersey and everybody up north. I still got family up there for the most part too. But I think in just, North Carolina and personally for me, it's a great place to be. It really is. It's got the best of both worlds here. You're 2 hours from the mountains. You're 2 hours from the beach. You've got everything that you can need in the middle of everything. It's a growing area. I mean,
you have to pump your own gas.
Yeah, you do. You have to do that. That's absolutely true.
I've still never done that.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I think now that we brought that up, the one time I was up there and I stopped at a gas station, it was weird for me. I was like, what do you mean I don't have to get out?
What do you get out of your car? I'm like, excuse me.
Yeah. I'm like, do I tip the guy? What do I do? So it's a really, North Carolina has become home for me. It really has. I've gotten my undergrad and now graduate education, graduated high school from here, went through middle school as well here. And most of my friends, for the most part are here. But it's a growing area. Like I'm in downtown Raleigh right now, and I'm about 3 blocks from the legislature and not too far from the Campbell Law Building here in Raleigh as well too. And I'm in a brand new apartment complex, and next door there's a brand new apartment complex, and there's one next door being opened up, that's in the midst of construction, and then there's a Publix being built under. It's like every day when you go around Raleigh, whether you're by NC State's campus, whether you're in downtown on the Glenwood side, over here on the Fayetteville Street side, whatever the place is. There's always something new that's being, produced, that's being built. There's always an addition. It's crazy, but it's obviously what's drawing a lot of people here. New businesses are coming in here, and has a lot to do with the policies that are being put in place here at our local level when it comes to just getting people here, having the economic benefit of being here, and then obviously it's a more sustainable place to live. I mean, in terms of I'm sure everyday price here. I mean, it makes a whole lot of sense to be somewhere here where you kind of get the best of both worlds, I think, than most other places, at least now.
So the other race that I want to talk about, sorry, because I'm sharing a room with other people, making noise. The other race I want to talk about, obviously, is the, I guess he was the sweetheart of the young Republicans, but is Madison Cawthorn, at least for us, all the YRs think he's gorgeous. So how's his race going down there?
I haven't heard too much about him, to be honest. I mean, he's out on the western part of the state, so you got to keep that in mind. I had seen him at the RNC, which I thought was great, and obviously had seen kind of what went on there when he was up speaking, and I thought that was fantastic to watch. But I've heard nothing but good things about him, at least coming my way, and I think he can definitely be something for the party standpoint. I think he can definitely be somebody that's going to be really important in terms of a young Republican kind of coming up into the Washington, D.C. sphere and making a lot of really, really impactful changes and being a good voice up there. I mean, I think of him a lot like I do even like Dan Crenshaw, for instance. I think he's one of those type personalities, and he seems like a really bright young guy. I've never had the pleasure of meeting him, but, it does seem like he's got a really good future in front of him.
And you have a Senate race as well?
Yeah, we've got Tom Tillis and Cal Cunningham. That's a really big one. So they actually had their first debate on Monday on WRL here locally, which was great. And I think Senator Tillis did fantastic in that. And I think they have a couple more scheduled. That one, Senator Tillis is, from what I can recall, it always seems like it's close. And there always seems to be a lot of, it always seems really neck and neck. But Senator Tillis has done a really good job. And we, as North Carolinians, we need somebody like him to stay up there. I mean,
so how is the whole back and forth going on about the second stage stimulus, or I don't know, third stage, but the stimulus back and forth going on with the House?
Yeah, it's, unfortunately, it seems like every day is kind of a new message that I have heard, at least it's coming from there. It's a little all over the place. I'm not too confident that we're going to see anything anytime soon. If you asked me 2 months ago, I probably would have told you it was incoming and there's these conversations going on. That when we got our CARES Act, when the CARES Act funding came down, I mean, I think from North Carolina's perspective, everyone was really hesitant at first to just go carte blanche spending a bunch of money that we now are not even 100% certain of the guidance that was in place by the federal government even at that time. So it was, there was some hesitation there. And then obviously everything, that we had, the General Assembly in North Carolina had done was, in my opinion, fantastic and trying to, responsibly spend that money and put it in places that we needed it. But, I'd be, in terms of the economic state right now of everything that had gone on with the shutdown, that's really critical and could be very, very beneficial for everyone here if we got a second or, I guess you're correct, in the third round. To come, down to the state here is that, I think we need it. We do. I mean, I think we're getting our forecast numbers that are coming in and it's a little bit, it's not necessarily trending in the best direction, and that, that type of funding would be critical.
Did that come up in the debate?
It did. It did come up in the debate from what I saw, because I think from Senator Tillis's perspective, Cal Cunningham at that point, from what I had seen kind of come out publicly, and I think Senator Tillis had pushed him on it a little bit, was, voting no on these bills as a whole, rather than pointing out beneficial provisions,
right.
Compared to maybe something that, he disagrees with or something that he would want more of an emphasis towards. And I think Senator Tillis has the track record to say, hey, I'm in these conversations and I've been able to, prioritize different aspects of it and try to push for this as a whole, because I think he understands the need for it. Even if it's not going to be perfect. I mean, anyone that's worked on or understood any giant omnibus bill, whether it's an appropriations bill, a relief bill, anything related to a natural disaster, anything even honed in policy wise, it's never going to be perfect. And there's always going to be stuff that you're going to disagree with even within it. But you have to kind of, and I think Senator Tillis did a good job of it in the debate, is kind of taking a step back and understanding, like, look, hey, this is what we need. This is what the state needs. This is what the people need. And we would be, it wouldn't be beneficial for us to sit here and nitpick and try to hone in on one thing that we think is, maybe not the best, but, at the end of the day, it's going to be doing something. And then that's kind of what he had pushed, what I had saw that he had pushed Cal Cunningham on a little bit, because he was, I think from what I understand, he was against most of the PPP loans. And then they had gone and found out that his company had applied for the PPP. So it's all that, kind of when you're in the debate, the hypocrisy type aspect of things. But I think Senator Tillis did a really good job in there of kind of understanding the needs of everybody and supporting the overall concept of trying to get something else back down here.
Okay.
So what else can you tell us about what's going on in North Carolina, either from a political standpoint or just, post-COVID? Are people in good spirits down there?
I would
so much new building.
Yeah, I would say so. I think from early on, everything kind of hit pause, like I had mentioned. But I think for the time being, I think everyone's kind of trying to adapt as much as they can, regardless of the policy that's in place. I mean, it's not perfect. There's still a lot that's shut down in terms of what is critical in my mind. And I think we kind of, unfortunately, looked at prioritizing essential and non-essential here from what the governor's office had kind of looked to say is a reopening plan. And it didn't necessarily work, long term and how, keeping everything fluid moving forward. But in terms of everyone's spirits, I mean, I don't know of many people that haven't gone about their lives. I mean, and that's how I think I look at all of this now, is that, right, we all have our hesitation at first, but in order for us to keep moving and adapting as people, we have to make do and we have to make things happen. And that doesn't mean we don't take into consideration other people. Absolutely not. But at the end of the day, we've all got our lives to live, and we've all got bills to pay, and we've all have things to progress towards in life. And I think most people around here, whether it's in Raleigh or outside of it, have kind of come to that understanding is, we might disagree with the policy that's in place or an executive order that comes out. But, we're not going to stop living, and we're going to keep doing what we have to do to make ends meet and keep moving forward here. Even if there's, anything that we might disagree with, we're going to have to keep going. And so that's kind of been the general attitude. In terms of anything else really going on in the state, I mean, it's, obviously, like I had said before, it's kind of what I see to be even on the presidential side of it. I think Senator Tillis is going to hopefully get back up there. And I think most of the numbers that I have kind of looked at in my, kind of brief experience here and looking at, local politics, I think he's going to be getting back up there. The governor's race, I think, like I mentioned before, is the big thing. I mean, and I think most people here want somebody that they can, not necessarily have to second guess. And I think most times, if you look at it from most Republicans here, is that they want somebody like Dan Forest, and then they want somebody like Dan Forest leading the state party here, and they think he's had a really great track record and doing great things, and they want to continue that and think, the role of governor would be more than fitting for him, and that he'd be doing a really good service to our state being up there.
The other thing I'm really curious about, though, was there any kind of impact, whether that be like economically or in any other way, from, the RNC was supposed to be in Charlotte, and then it was moved to Jacksonville and was eventually moved to a predominantly digital format. I know a couple of people did business in Charlotte, but was there any kind of impact from that plan changing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that'd be a better question maybe for Mecklenburg County, to be honest with you. But yeah, I think obviously it wasn't, I mean, there was a lot that was expected, and there was a lot of excitement there, even from the state party level of folks to be really having the honor to have it here. And we're really looking forward to it. But, unfortunately, we didn't get a lot of cooperation from the top officials here in our state. And, as much as we wanted to push for it and make it happen, at the end of the day, we still had a really good convention, in my opinion. I was more than happy to see, kind of the ingenuity of a lot of our Republicans here and making sure that it happened. And like I said, I think most of the mantra and most of the, the kind of general theme here is that, there might be obstacles in our way, and we could have had it one way, but we're still going to make it happen, whether it's physically here or whether it's elsewhere or whether it's virtual or in person. I mean, that kind of was most of the idea here. So I think Mecklenburg missed out, and Charlotte would have been a great host city for it. And I think it had everything set up to be a really great place to be. I've been to Charlotte numerous times. I think nothing but the best of it, despite some of the local politics there. But, it's a great city to be in. It would have been a great host for it. But,
I had all of my restaurants lined up. I had the Airbnb booked, and
Listen, there's plenty to do. You can go to Uptown, have a good time. I mean, I've been there plenty. I got friends down there, and it's a great place to be. So, it's upsetting, but like I said, at the end of the day here, I mean, you can have your thoughts, and there might be some economic impact from it that you maybe thought was coming our way, but it's not going to stop us from doing what we need to do.
I confess I'm disappointed. I was going to spend almost 2 weeks there.
Well, Mark, I was disappointed too. I would have came down and hung out with you. I'm not a 2.5 hour drive, so it would have been a good weekend. And Dwight would have been there. So.
Yeah, well, I know he was planning to go down. Yes, we're all disappointed not to be able to do that. How do you think the politics plays of that?
Yeah, I mean, you can't help but think maybe that there might have been a little bit more leniency if it was the other way. I mean, let's be honest, we understand that. As much as there were a lot of protocols that they said they would in place, from what I understand, there was a plan that was submitted. There was a lot of opposition that a lot of the other side or our side had thought was unreasonable. And I think, unfortunately, that may have had politics into play with it at the end of the day. You can't help but think that, you don't necessarily know for a fact, but, you can only think that. But that goes in with a lot of things. I mean, most of our bars here are still closed. And, if you look at it, maybe even from kind of comparing the two, there was a question asked in a press conference about whether or not, bars would be able to open and how that would look and why, certain breweries or outdoor eateries are allowed to be open. But say, for instance, a bar with an indoor-outdoor spacing, anything like that, why they're not allowed to open. And the response that was given was, well, they didn't submit a plan. And we were like, whoa, what do you mean you didn't submit a plan? If that's the prerequisite here. So it seems to be back and forth. And even when the plan, from what I understand, was submitted, it wasn't necessarily something that was universally kind of, in my opinion, accepted and reasonably looked at. It was kind of more of it became more of a national platform and national political issue. And I think that's kind of what hindered the overall decision rather than any actual rational way of looking at it and trying to make something like that happen.
You bring up an interesting point because, I've been asking myself the same question in New Jersey too, is that like, we only just got to the point a couple weeks ago where indoor dining was allowed at 25% capacity. It's already starting to feel like fall outside. You can't go on just saying outdoor dining only, or none of these restaurants are going to survive. Do you think that's going to be kind of an impetus at some point, or a little bit of a lit match in politics and in the government in North Carolina to start opening up things indoors?
Yeah, I mean, we've got our restaurants that are open limited capacity with social distancing and occupancy requirements that are in place right now. I think the general attitude right now from most of these bar owners, whether it be even in some of our major areas that are mostly, like I had said, kind of most leaning more left here than right, there's a lot of frustration and there's not a lot of understanding. They're and I can understand it even from their perspective because the message hasn't been clear. There hasn't been much consistency in terms of any trajectory here for keeping one thing closed and another open. It seemed really to be like, anything that was remotely fun or that had any sort of way for some folks to kind of have any sort of mental way to kind of, clear their head, have a good time, entertainment, were shut down. And like I had said, maybe rightfully so in the beginning, but there hasn't been anything kind of moving forward that had given anyone a sign that they're going to be able to get back to where they were, or even have a sliver of hope to maintain what they had. And it's
here in Maryland, we closed down churches. So
yeah, that was a part here too. And Mark, if you go through the timeline here, there's a lot, and it was ever changing. And I can tell you, just from looking on from March forward, it was really kind of hard to even trace and track, where things were going.
Right.
You want to put a number on a phase, fine. But if I think there's a real issue with things personally, where I have to sift through an executive order on a PDF online to understand how the economy of our state's going to work here in the next couple of weeks. I mean, there isn't clear messaging. There really hasn't been. And, there's been back and forth of enforcement. And I think a lot of our folks here outside of some of the major areas had kind of just said, you know what, enough's enough. And if you want to come, then you come and we'll deal with it from there. And that's understandable. I mean, you can't help it. If you put folks in a desperate position, they're going to do stuff to maintain what they have and survive. And you can't fault them for it, in my opinion. So it's kind of been a little bit unclear in terms of where we're going or how things are going to open. I mean, we just had another announcement a few weeks ago of what can now open even a little bit more. I mean, there's been lawsuits in our state against the governor, whether it be restaurant coalitions or the bowling coalition about keeping bowling alleys closed. I mean, it was really kind of going in a direction that you can't help but take a step back and think, what is going on here? Like, why are we doing this? Where's the rationale for it? And unfortunately, most of the public messaging that we saw was a governor that deferred to his Department of Health and Human Services secretary, and a reoccurring line of, well, the science, and no real explanation there besides, the 3 T's and tracking, tracing, and testing. But, at the end of the day, those numbers fluctuated. And we saw upwards of last week in Mecklenburg County had a couple thousand false positives of text messages that were sent out to people. And it's like, how do you expect people to have a clear idea for the most part of, one, how serious something like this is, and 2, the repercussions that need to be justified or not here? And it's tough.
It sounds like your governor might be friends with our county executive, but that's a conversation for another time. So,
you know what? At the end of the day, right? I had no ill will towards our governor at all, and I think in terms of partisan politics, it's tough for somebody to be put in a spot like that early on, and I was more than willing to stand with them here and to understand where a lot of this was going and to really understand how difficult some of these decisions are. Yeah. Sorry, I got a dog over here.
Oh, I don't know if you heard my dog's growling in the background.
You're okay. He's like eating his food bowl. I have no idea what's going on right now, and he's more than an arm's length away. But it's tough to kind of, I was with him for the most part, and I think most people were, and because it's a tough decision for anybody to be put in, and it's unfortunately kind of just gone in a bad direction in my opinion. And and you've got folks that are kind of on other sides of the fence, and it's become partisan and political. And I think really, if this is the public health crisis that we all understand it to be, and it is, then it shouldn't be that way. So it's a little bit, you know, it's a little bit frustrating again. I know I've said it a lot.
And I have a big dose of sympathy and understanding for any of the people in political power during this time. I mean, no one expected a pandemic. No one knew how to handle a pandemic. So, you know, I feel that sympathy there. But then, you know, we've also been in this for like 6+ months now. And it's, you know, time to start loosening the reins a little bit. But on that note, we are coming up to the end of the show. So sure. Is there anything else you wanted to plug? Anything else you wanted to get out there? Anything else you wanted to tell our viewers?
No, well, you know what? I just want to generally express my appreciation for you guys willing to, you know, reach out and have me on. I do really appreciate it. It was nice to catch up with Dwight and Mark, and Jackie. It was nice meeting you. You know, I would say to keep North Carolina close on your radar here as we look at things moving forward. Yeah, I mean, this is a battleground state, as we all know, but, you know, it's also a really changing state at the same time too. So it's an important place, but it's also a great place. I've got nothing but positive things to say, and hopefully you all can come down here and visit me sometime soon. Be happy to show you around. We can have a good time. Plenty of things to do here, you know, but at the end of the day, you know, we're all kind of put in a weird spot right now. And I think hopefully we'll have a little bit more of a clear picture here after November.
Yeah, Wake Forest is the founding place of one of my favorite food trucks that was at GW, so.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. No, Wake Forest, that's my favorite place. I mean, that's my home.
They still have Swizzler in Wake Forest. Whoever from North Carolina is watching, go get a hot dog.
Yeah.
And you even have a Montgomery County, North Carolina.
Yeah. Yeah. That's out west. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Anyway, it's been great having you on the show.
All right, guys. Well, thank you so much. And like I said, I'd love to come back on if you ever want my input again. I think I was more concerned from the get-go that you guys were looking for my 2 cents more than anything. So
thank you.
But it went great, and I really appreciate it. You guys have a great night. All right.
You too. All right. We'll see everybody next one.